The traitor legions encompass the most bloodthirsty curs of the known galaxy. Pitiless marauders who attempt to drown their own shameful past in the blood of the innocent. Those crafted to usher in an age of peace and prosperity unending, now sully their blades in the name of war perpetual. For today, we shall elucidate the rabid scions of the 12th Legion, whose rampages sate their need to stifle the torments of their butcher's nails. The Sons of the Red Angel, the World Eaters.
You kept that mule, Kor Phaeron. Russ kept his kin friends. The lion kept Luthor. Humans, brothers and foster fathers, saved and raised into Legion ranks. But not me. Not Angron, no. Did the Emperor teleport his gold-wrapped custodians down to help me and my army? No. Did he free the warhounds and order them to battle, fight alongside me? No. Did he save my brothers and sisters the way he spared and honored the lion's closest kin? The way he honored Kor Phaeron? No, no, and no. No mercy for Angron. Angron the Oathbreaker. Angron the Betrayer.
The Primarchs of his Imperium would shoulder many burdens with their service. Created to lead humanity's greatest armies, to purge the galaxy of heresy and malevolent influence, each Primarch would wrestle control of their inner nature to best lead their legions as exemplars of the Emperor's vision. Yet many of the sons of the Master of Mankind would be afflicted with inner turmoil and prove to be unsalvageable. For today, we shall elucidate one such Primarch whose homeworld influence would forever damn him to a life of pain, fury, and bloodlust. The Lord of the Red Sands, Angron. With the scattering of the Primarchs across the stars, the Primarch of the 12th Legion would land upon the world of Nuceria within close proximity to the Ultima Segmentum. A civilized world ruled by aristocratic tyrants, the technologically advanced civilization would, though self-sufficient, bear a deeply troubling fascination with violence. The impoverished civilians under the ruling elite of the planet hungered to vent their frustrations by observing the misery and suffering of others. Organizing gladiatorial spectacles to distract the populace, the oligarchic nobles would cybernetically enhance their chosen pawns to enact brutal rampages within the gladiator pits. The young Primarch would be discovered by a slaver of the pits, finding the injured boy surrounded by Xenos corpses high in the Deshelika Mountains. Scholars would theorize the assailants to be the Eldari, armed with the forewarning of the scourge that the young boy would bring to the galaxy. Their assassination failed, the corpses of the Xenos would aid in encouraging the slaver to sell his foundling for a high price to the rulers of Nuceria. Brought to the palace of Praxica, within the city of Deshea, the slaver would sell the young warrior to the house of Falkyr. Thrust into battle, barely of the age of a toddler, the child Primarch would, alongside 100 slaves, battle an acid-spewing creature upon the gladiator pit Ziggurat. As acid filled the arena, the Primarch would by necessity kill any who took up space on the ever-dwindling platform. Surviving his first battle within the pit, the child would shed a tear for those he had slain to endure his barbaric trial. His promise as a gladiator would see the child ascend to fight within the largest arena of the land and be given the name Angronius Falkyr, Child of the Mountain. Recovering from his wounds, Angron would rapidly grow in size due to his enhanced genetics and within months become the foremost acclaimed gladiator of Nuceria. The populace of Nuceria would come to cherish the champion of the arena. Dubbing the Primarch as the Lord of the Red Sands, after his deeds on the blood-soaked earth of gladiator pits, Angron, whilst physically strong, would also display a profound sense of honor and mercy. Sparing the lives of gladiators whom had proven their merit in battle, Angron would slay hundreds of warriors, yet never succumb to his baser instincts. The unbeaten gladiator of Deshea would, despite his circumstance, enjoy the thrill of battle and adulation of his people. Yet in secret, Angron would plot to escape his bonds of slavery, and on many occasions attempt, and fail, to escape his captors. Mentored by the veteran gladiator of the pits, Oenomus, the old warrior would act as a foster father to the young and impressionable Primarch. Side by side, Angron and Oenomus would slay scores of opponents within the pit. An especially acclaimed victory against a pair of Ogren berserkers implanted with the deadly contraption known as the Butcher's Nails. Their ample strength further amplified by the cortical implants, the opponents of the Lord of Red Sands would bound into the fray with feral rage and fury. Yet such a victory would sour the efforts of the so-called High Riders of the aristocrats of Nuceria, and soon after, Angron would be pitted against his mentor in combat. Facing one another in a duel to the death, Angron would refuse to fight his father figure. The Primarch's insolence would see him restrained by the guards of the arena, and as punishment, the High Riders would implant the Butcher's Nails within Angron's skull. A relic from the Dark Age of technology, historical records are unclear as to how the Nucerians came to own such dangerous implants, but what can be gleaned is that their actions would damn countless billions to death across the millennia. Imbued with increased adrenal function, strength, aggression, and overwhelming bloodlust, Angron's path to damnation would begin. Blinding all sense of reason or morality within the Primarch's mind, the nails would dig deep until all that would end their inflicted suffering would be the release of blood and viscera. Rewarding violence with spasms of pleasure, Angron would become a living embodiment of rage. The High Riders would test their new feral beast's abilities by releasing Oenomus to face him in combat. Tearing him limb from limb, Angron's hunger for violence would not be sated in his frenzied, berserk state. Regaining clarity after the maiming of his foster father, Angron would quickly wallow in despair at his actions. Howling alike to a feral beast, Angron's wails of sorrow would not end for several days. Angron would swear that one day he shall escape the shackles of the High Riders and achieve vengeance for his manipulation and his father's death. For several years, Angron would train and organize the gladiators of the arena into a brotherhood of warriors. Dominating any challengers chosen to face them, the Deshaean gladiators would respect their leader with utter devotion and aid in his plot to escape the arena. Upon the grandest spectacle of the Death Games, the gladiators would make their escape. Assembling the entirety of his men, Angron and his gladiators would enter the arena en masse to rapturous applause. Turning on the arena guards, the gladiators would butcher their wardens and escape the arena among the panicked stampede of the civilian onlookers. Armed with firearms, the remaining arena guards would put down a swathe of the gladiators, armed with swords and scant armor. Yet despite the resistance, 2,000 Deshaean gladiators would escape to the mountains of Angron's origins. For years, the rulers would hunt down the gladiators and slowly erode their numbers. Naming themselves the Eaters of Cities, the Deshaean gladiators under Angron's command would hold any incursion to capture or slay their band of warriors. However, attrition would slowly see to the dwindling of the Eaters of Cities until their numbers declined to 1,000 men and women. Upon the mountain of Fedan Moor, Angron's band of gladiators would make their final stand. At the Gest Elica Ridge, the Eaters of Cities would be surrounded by 7 armies of Nuceria. Angron and his warriors would be doomed to die in combat, for even a Primarch would be unable to best such an overwhelming force. Yet Angron would not die this day, and with the intervention of the Emperor of Mankind, the Primarch of the 12th Legion would be saved. Observing the Primarch's struggles in secret, the Master of Mankind would watch his son's rebellion from afar. Descending to the battle with a cadre of his custodians, the Emperor would offer his aid in the battle should his son assume the mantle of leadership of the 12th Legion, the Warhounds. Refusing the Emperor's offer, Angron would demand that he remain on Nuceria with his gladiator kin and not withdraw from the planet until his enslavers had been brought to justice. Reluctantly, the Emperor would teleport Angron to his flagship, shocked at the sheer refusal of his son to adopt the responsibility ordained by his word. Finding his son wanting in strategical acumen, the Master of Mankind would not let his irreplaceable son die to the rabble of a backwater planet. The Eaters of Cities would be massacred without the leadership of Angron, to which the Lord of Red Sands would watch their annihilation helplessly from orbit. Lashing out at the Custodian Guard, Angron would slay one of the Emperor's guardians until the Master of Mankind would use his psychic might to subdue the Primarch. Hoping in time that Angron would understand the realities of why the Emperor had abandoned his band of warriors, the Master of Mankind would seek to salvage the potential of his much beleaguered and scarred son. Angron was a ghost of the Emperor's former plans, yet a Primarch he would remain. For every Primarch would serve the Imperium in the campaigns of the Great Crusade. Embittered to his father's dismissal of his plight, Angron would come to resent the Emperor for his disregard for his honor to die with his men. Nurturing the deep wound in his psyche, the Lord of Red Sands would regardless assume command of his legion, the Warhounds, in an attempt to sate the ever-worsening cravings of the Butcher's Nails. Murdering the captains of his legion and the 12th Legion Master, Ibram Grier, in a fit of rage, Angron's hatred for his stranger sons would be calmed with the intervention of the Legion's 8th captain, Kharn. Volunteering to soothe his Primarch's torment, Kharn would be beaten to near death by his Genefather. Yet Kharn's resolve to never accept defeat would resonate with his Primarch, and for his efforts, a bond between Kharn and Angron would form. Convincing his Primarch that the Legion was worthy to honor the legacy of the gladiators of Deshea, Captain Driga would offer a change in the 12th's title. No longer would they be the Emperor's Warhounds. From then on, they would become the Eaters of Worlds for the Lord of Red Sands. Now known throughout the Imperium as the World Eaters, Angron would lead his men to bring many worlds into compliance into the fold of the Imperium. Incorporating the Nucerian gladiator cultural trappings into their legion, the World Eaters would become synonymous for their efficient yet bloody deeds. Experts in neurological surgery and cortical implant technologies would study the Primarch's affliction of the Butcher's Nails. Realizing that the implants, combined with the Primarch's enhanced biological functions, had integrated beyond all hope of removal, Angron's brain had been remapped to incorporate the nail's influence above all other stimuli of his body. Reducing his serotonin neurotransmitters and deadening all emotions beside aggression, Angron's capabilities of reason would be continually lost as the influence of the nails progressed. Removal of the Butcher's Nails would definitely kill the Primarch, yet their continual presence would regardless slowly kill him. The 12th Legion's burdens would be many, as not only was their Primarch slowly dying from his affliction, his reputation as the only Primarch to fail in conquering his homeworld would worsen the World Eater's already infamous reputation. Morale was low within the 12th Legion, yet their purpose as the serrated edge of the Great Crusade would at least give them purpose. Conflict was the only measure of the worth of the World Eaters, for they would earn no glory or plaudits, only satisfaction in battle as warriors. Seeking to emulate their Primarch and become closer to his solitary struggle, the legionaries of the World Eaters would volunteer themselves to undergo the procedure to be implanted with Butcher's Nails of their own devising. Ordering his apothecaries to construct the nails and begin implanting them within his legion, Angron would seek to transform the 12th into warriors befitting the heritage of Nuceria's gladiators. Initially yielding a 100% failure rate, the nails would cause any implanted to die a painful death, yet Angron would not relent in his demands for the nails to be refined and trialed. Abandoning his legion for their weakness to follow in the steps of the gladiators of Deshea, it would take 2 years for his equerry, Kharn, to reunite the Lord of Red Sands with his legion. Shedding their weakness, Kharn would be the first to survive the Butcher's Nail surgery, and by his example, the Legion would completely integrate the nails into their bodies or die in the attempt. Observing the rapid devolution of the World Eater's discipline in favor of frenzied rage, detractors of the 12th Legion would let their criticisms be known. Rabute Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines Legion, would be disgusted during his joint campaign alongside Angron during the cleansing of Arigata. Nicknamed the Red Angel, Angron's reputation for committing atrocities would become of great concern to the Imperium. The World Eaters in their frenzied state had hurled themselves into the most unwinnable of odds, and enacted a heavy toll of losses for their lack of self-preservation. Ordering his men to bring worlds into compliance within 31 Nucerian standard hours, upon failure, the Red Angel would execute 1/10 of his men in order to root out the weakness within the Legion. Learning of the Butcher's Nails implantation within the Legion, the Emperor of Mankind would dispatch the Primarch of the 6th Legion, Leman Russ, to order Angron to end his heretical surgeries. Known by Imperial records as the Knight of the Wolf, the Emperor's executioner with his legion of Space Wolves would confront the World Eaters after the massacre of the planet of Genna. Refusing the orders of the Wolf King, Angron and Leman Russ would battle. The Fenrisian chainsword, Krakenmaw, would clash against Angron's chain axe, Widowmaker. Each legion would claim that the other fired the first shot that would begin the melee, but all that bears remembering is that there would be no clear victor of the skirmish. Widowmaker would be destroyed at the hands of the Wolf King, yet Angron would assert his victory in combat against the restrained might of Leman Russ. Yet Angron would assert his victory in combat against the restrained might of the Wolf King. Withdrawing from battle, despite their censure and warning of the Imperium, the World Eaters would continue their Butcher's Nails implantation. Claiming the skulls of their foes from battle, the World Eaters would not relent in their ever-worsening onslaught across the galaxy. The Imperium would ignore the barbarity of the 12th Legion's actions should they continue to enforce the will of the Emperor. Yet such oversight would prove to be devastating to the future of the Imperium, with the dawn of the civil war for humanity's soul, the Horus Heresy. Corrupted by the thrall of the ruinous powers, the War Master and Primarch of the 16th Legion, Horus Lupercal, would begin his quest to end the reign of the Emperor. Before his duplicity would be known, the Master of Mankind would send the War Master to confront Angron for his actions during the Great Crusade. Offering the Lord of Red Sands a chance at vengeance against his most hated father, it would not take much of Horus's lauded charisma to convince Angron to join the rebellion of the traitor Primarchs. Culling the loyalist elements within his legion, Angron would once more seek to purge any sign of weakness from within his ranks. Among the first members of the Pact of Betrayal, the World Eaters would stand at the forefront of the war for humanity. Joining the second wave of traitors during the Dropsite massacre of Istvan V, Angron would relish the chance to slay the loyalists to the throne. Proving to be instrumental in the vanguard of the traitor war effort, Angron's rampages across the stars would seemingly be destined to succeed. As the Word-Bearers and World Eaters joined forces to engage the Ultramarines within their home system of Ultramar, their so-called Shadow Crusade would slow the advance of the Imperium's most numerically superior and lauded legion. Yet with every battle fueled by the sting of the Butcher's Nails, Angron's terminal affliction would worsen. Attempting to heal his brother, the Primarch of the Word-Bearers, Lorgar Aurelian, would beseech the Red Angel to return to his homeworld of Nuceria. Due to its close proximity within the Ultima Segmentum, the Urizen would hope to confront the High Riders of Nuceria, and with Angron by his side, find a means to remove the Butcher's Nails from his afflicted brother. At last given an opportunity to bring his enslavers to justice, Angron and his World Eaters would venture to Nuceria. Upon the arrival of the 12th and 17th Legions to the planet of Nuceria, Angron would descend once more to the Deshelika Ridge of the mountains. Paying his respects to his fallen brothers in arms, Angron would collect the skulls of his former brethren and adorn them across his armor. Confronting the High Riders of Deshea, Angron would be enraged at their disrespect of the retelling of the deaths of his noble gladiators. The populace believed Angron to have fled the battle and left his men to die in disgrace. Incensed by the lies of the High Riders, Angron would order his men to execute every living soul within the city and once finished, commit genocide across the planet. Yet the Lord of Red Sands' plot to annihilate his people would be halted by the Ultramarines commanded by their Primarch, Rabute Guilliman. The Retribution fleet of Ultramar would battle the combined might of the World Eaters and Word-Bearers, both in orbit and on the planet's surface. The Lord of Ultramar would battle Lorgar Aurelian in single combat, and after a bitter clash, come close to ending the Urizen's life. However, Angron would not allow Guilliman to end the life of the bearer of the word. Unleashing his fury against the Lord of Ultramar, Angron would, despite his might, receive a glancing blow from Guilliman's power fist. A skull of Angron's once dead gladiators would fall from his armor, and Guilliman would unwittingly crush it beneath his mighty ceramite boot. Surrendering fully to his anguish, Angron would once more launch himself into the fray. Feeling the malevolent power of the warp in the wake of Angron's boundless grief, emanating from beyond the veil of the mortal realm. Chanting heretical litanies and imbuing Angron with the fury of the Blood God, Lorgar would enact the ascension of the Lord of Red Sands into a demon prince of Khorne. His torment, rage and despair coalescing into the form of a demonic being of unimaginable wrath, the Red Angel would achieve apotheosis. Withdrawing from the battle, the Ultramarines and their Primarch would retreat in horror at the sight of the being birthed on the planet of Nuceria. Lorgar had saved his brother from the clutches of death, yet in doing so, damned countless future souls to suffer at the hands of the reborn Red Angel. Ordering Khan to butcher the slaves within the hold of the World Eater's flagship, Conqueror, the Demon Prince of Khorne would demand a throne of skulls to be built in his honor. Rampaging throughout the galaxy in his now ascended form, Angron's hunger for blood would not be sated by the lesser mortals and fiefdoms of the stars. Only the blood of humanity's most cherished bastion and its ruler would be fitting for such a horrific being. Brought to assemble with the traitor Primarchs at the world of Ulanor by the Primarch of the Iron Warriors, Perturabo, the World Eaters would once more lead the charge to Holy Terra. Creating a gigantic warp rift above the moon of Luna, Angron and his World Eaters would be the initial hammer blow of the traitor advance. Perched atop the Conqueror, Angron would observe the bloodletting of his legion with grim satisfaction. Enslaved to the whims of the blood god, Khorne, Angron would assault the Imperial Palace during the Siege of Terra as a terrible angel of vengeance. Slaying friend and foe alike, Angron's massacre of any who stood in his path would be terrible and uncompromising in its savagery. Destroying the defenses of the Lionsgate spaceport and Eternity Wall, even the bravest of souls would fall to the fell Black Blade and its malevolent wielder, before its edge would crash through the great gate of the Imperial Palace. Yet despite the efforts of the World Eaters, would need to hasten their assault. Wary of the ever closer arrival of the Dark Angels, Space Wolves, and Ultramarines to Holy Terra, the War Master would confront the Emperor in single combat. The Emperor would defeat Horus Lupercal and destroy his very being from existence. The armies of Chaos would fragment and retreat from the Siege of Terra, to which Angron, though the last to withdraw, would be no exception. Seeking refuge within the Eye of Terror, the World Eaters would over the millennia abandon their Primarch and fragment into several warbands. His last great revenge against the Master of Mankind thwarted, Angron skulks the Emiterium and bides his time for his seemingly random conquests of distant worlds. Prosecuting wars in the name of his patron god, Angron would be banished from the material realm during the Dominion of Fire campaign and First War for Armageddon. Yet with the return of the long-dormant Primarch of the Ultramarines, Rabute Guilliman, rumors stir that the Red Angel shall once again return to real space during the Era Indomitus. Further transformed into a being of unrelenting fury, whose death grants only a momentary reprieve before his inevitable return, the Lord of Red Sands shall not cease his campaign of bloodshed and butchery. For in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war, and the Red Angel shall delight in every death made in the name of conflict across the stars.
What brought you so low, brother? Did the machine in your skull finally refashion your loyalty into madness? They let me dream. They give me peace. What would you know of struggle, perfect son? When have you fought against the mutilations of your mind? When have you had to do anything more than tally compliances and polish your armor?
Childish, Guilliman sighed, gesturing to the burning, dying city. Does it really come down to this? So pitiably childish.
Childish? The people of your world named you Great One. The people of mine called me Slave.
Angron stepped back, chainsaws revving harder.
Which one of us landed on a paradise of civilization to be raised by a foster father, Rabute? Which one of us was given armies to lead after training in the halls of the Macregian High Riders? Which one of us inherited a strong, cultured kingdom?
Angron splayed blood as he frothed the words.
And which of us had to rise up against a kingdom with nothing but a horde of starving slaves? Which one of us was a child enslaved in a world of monsters, with his brain cut open by carving knives?
The two Primarchs met again. Guilliman's powered gauntlets should have easily deflected Angron's chainsaws, but the World Eater's strength drove his brother back step by step. Chain teeth sprayed from the weapons as eagerly as the saliva from Angron's lipless slit of a mouth.
Listen to your blue-clad wretches yelling of courage and honor. Courage and honor. Do you even know the meaning of those words? Courage is fighting the kingdom that enslaves you, no matter that their armies overshadow yours by 10,000 to 1. You know nothing of courage. Honor is restraining a tyrant when all others suckle and grow fat on the hypocrisy he feeds them. You know nothing of honor.
I have slain many enemies, and won many battles, and I tell you there is no great secret to success in war. No subtle trick or strategy that has saved my foes. I seek out the enemy, attack as soon as I am able, and with all the force at my command, rend his soldiers and smash his fortresses, leave only corpses behind me, and then move on. Thus my Primarch has taught me, and I find his wisdom has proved worthy on 100 battlefields. Among the warriors of the Legiones Astartes, many would earn glories and deeds worthy of legend. Their battle honors retold for millennia, each hero of the era Indomitus shall regale the tales of their chapter forebears and attempt to emulate their example of martial skill, valor, and courage. Yet the Space Marines of the Chaos Legions, in the stead of glory, would garner only infamy for their slaughter, barbarism, and heresy. For today, we shall elucidate the merciless killer of the Blood God, said to have claimed the skulls of more than 1 million souls. The 8th captain of the World Eaters Legion, Kharn the Betrayer. With the unification of the war-ravaged world of Terra, a new breed of warriors would be forged. Divided into 20 legions of so-called Angels of Death, these transhuman soldiers would each be crafted to specialize in methods of warfare deemed necessary by the Master of Mankind. The 12th Legion, the Warhounds of Terror, would epitomize brutal efficiency in close-quarters combat and rip, tear, and shred their enemies into bloody ribbons. These were not the warriors of poise, such as the Emperor's Children, nor the stoic defenders of the Imperial Fists, or even the rout of the 6th. They were unabashed and unapologetic killers. Earning favor by the Master of Mankind for their blunt yet unwavering loyalty, the so-called Dogs of War of the Emperor would be unleashed upon his foes, where all semblance of remorse or pity would be irrelevant. For among these initial recruits, following the expanse of the burgeoning legion across the stars, a Terran aspirant known as Kharn would begin his first steps upon his eightfold path. Trained by the Centurion Master of Recruits, Gruner, Kharn would train upon the vassal world of Bot until his opportunity to prove himself worthy of the 12th Legion would begin. Competing in the Contest, a now established ritual of the 12th Legion, Gruner would task each aspirant to claim 1,000 skulls. No Astartes had ever accomplished such an endeavor, yet its express objective would drive each Astartes to endeavor to charge into battle with purpose in their minds. Inquiring as to the methods they must use to acquire such trinkets, Kharn's question would earn derision and humiliation as Centurion Gruner simply laughed at his naivety. Resolving to never be humiliated again, Khan would swiftly claim skulls across dozens of war zones in order to prove his martial skill and ascend through the ranks of the Legion. Set apart from his kin as among the most savage warriors of the Warhounds, Khan would rise to the rank of Centurion of the 8th Company prior to the reunion of the Legion and its Primarch, Angron. Though usually a time of great renewal and pride for many legions, the reunion of the 12th Legion with their Primarch would bring only misfortune. Finding their Genesire not to be a conqueror of worlds, nor a king of repute, their liege would be rescued by the master of mankind from the world of Nuceria as a slave. Implanted with the foul device, the butcher's nails during his gladiatorial indentured servitude of the High Riders of Nuceria, the rage stirred within the Lord of the Red Sands would be held in check with only the most fragile restraint. Sealed within the cargo hold of the Warhound's flagship, the Adamant Resolve, Angron would be spirited from his kindred gladiators as they perished at the hands of their oppressors upon the Deshelika Mountains below. Seeking an audience with their Genesire following the encounter, each captain of the Legion would attempt to console their Primarch. Overcome with a homicidal rage, Angron would cut down several of the most senior officers of the Legion, as with each death, the Centurion's resolve would waver. Yet among those still alive, only one would have the bravery to face his fratricidal Genefather. Calmly approaching Angron as he crossed the chamber, now littered with the blood and torn fragments of his fellow captains, Khan would walk upon the shadow of his looming patriarch. Set upon by Angron, despite his inner need to resist his master's wrath, Khan would not lay a hand upon his Primarch, unlike his peers. Having sworn an oath to the Emperor to never fight his Primarch, Khan would endure the brutalization inflicted by his Genesire. Fighting his own instincts to surrender his faculties or retaliate against his Primarch, Khan would accept his fate, no matter should he live or die. Defiantly abiding any wound inflicted by his master, the Centurion of the 8th Company would not beg for mercy, nor yield in the face of impossible odds. Impressed with his son's mental and physical fortitude, Angron would relent in his rampage and see within Khan the true honor and worthiness that the 12th Legion could possess. Now the most respected individual of the Legion in the eyes of Angron, Khan would beseech his Primarch to allow his Legion to prove themselves worthy of his favor. Installed as the personal equerry of the Lord of the Red Sands, Khan had proven to be the most capable among his kin to counsel his Primarch. For the future of the Legion would be fraught with woes and misfortune, as the signs of their downfall would begin to show. Renamed as the World Eaters to honor the bravery of the fallen gladiators of Nuceria, known as the Eaters of Cities, the 12th Legion would likewise eschew their former honors and deeds as they sought to epitomize the noble heritage of their Primarch's struggle. Khan, now ascended as the personal confidant of Angron, would seem an ill-fitting bearer of the title of equerry. Lacking patience, oratory skill, or the subtleties of politics, Khan would inhabit the role solely due to his ability to console and temper his Primarch's bloodlust. Always at the side of his master among the most dangerous of battles, any foe who would escape the wrathful strikes of Angron's weapons would be cut down by his stalwart lieutenant. Despite his attempts to allow the Legion to prove themselves the equal of their forebears in the eyes of their Primarch, the World Eaters would continue to fail to meet Angron's expectations. Abandoning his Legion, Angron would venture alone into the void of space, to which he would not be discovered for over 2 Terran Standard years. Convincing his Primarch to once again rejoin the Legion, Angron would reluctantly give his Legion one more chance to prove themselves worthy. Apothecary Garland Surlak would reverse engineer his Primarch's own Butcher's Nails cortical implants with technologies derived from the world of Genna, to which volunteers of the World Eaters would attempt to survive the integration surgeries of the Fel Archaeotech. All who attempted the procedure would perish, leading Angron to consider once again abandoning his men. Centurion Mago would attempt to destroy Apothecary Serlac's equipment after witnessing the horrors inflicted upon his kin and their descent into madness, yet Khan would once again, with his actions, decide the fate of his legion. Preventing the destruction of the Butcher's Nail's copies, Khan would undergo the procedure and through sheer force of will and endurance overcome untold suffering and pain to survive his implantation surgeries. Renewed with purpose in their successful implantation of their first World Eater into his ascended form, a further 1,000 Astartes would undergo the surgeries and survive. Reflecting and incorporating their Genesire's dour and aggressive disposition, the World Eater's descent into madness and blood fury would only worsen. Ripe prey for the blood god, Khorne, the World Eaters had begun to walk the Eightfold Path in earnest, and with their Primarch's submission to his thirst for bloodshed and slaughter, their fate would be sealed upon the world of Istvan Free. Renewed with an all-consuming need to slay worthy foes in battle, Khan would quickly gain the notice of the being known as Khorne with the dawn of the war known as the Horus Heresy. Joining his legion in their massacre of their loyalist contingents upon the world of Istvan Free, Captain Khan would be observed by the Lunar Wolf, Garviel Loken, to be steeped in a so-called dark madness as the two crossed blades in battle. Screaming, "I am the Eightfold Path," Khan would, despite his savage might, be felled by Loken in battle and be thrown onto the dozer blades of an armored tank. Refusing to die, Khan would claw his way from under the tank's treads, despite his catastrophic injuries incurred from battle. Recovering from his wounds, Khan would subsequently be dispatched to the world of Prospero in search of the so-called Moonwolf Sigil, once gifted to the Crimson King by Horus Lupercal, and begin his own personal quest to find a means of curing his mental ailments. Searching for mind-healing arcanum to help ease the suffering incurred by the Butcher's Nails, Khan and his men would set upon the beleaguered survivors of the burning of Prospero, led by Captain Menes Calliston, for information. Interrogating Calliston, the Thousand Sons captain would reveal such devices to aid his affliction had been destroyed, yet would offer his own psychic powers to aid in his salvation whilst biding time to recover his weakened strength. Foreseeing Khan's fate as the uncontainable, unthinking, and unstoppable conduit of the Blood God's wrath, Calliston would be horrified to see the future portents of such a terrible being. Refusing such an offer, Khan would bludgeon Captain Calliston to death and return to his legion for redeployment. Joining with the Wordbearer's legion for the despicable Shadow Crusade, the World Eaters would invade the realm of Ultramar to conduct a campaign of harrowing the innocent populace and draw out their protectors, the Ultramarines. During the campaign, the 13th Legion would ensnare the World Eater's Primarch, Angron, into a trap upon the world of Armatura, collapsing entire buildings on top of the foul Red Angel and his men. Damaging the Lord of Red Sand's chain axes, Angron would cast away his weapon, known as Gorechild, for its teeth had been ripped from their sockets, and its function was now unusable. Superstitious of repairing or inheriting weapons, the World Eaters would cite their Primarch's own culture of Nuceria, that to use a weapon discarded by another would bring bad luck to those who would bear them. Yet Khan would observe the venerated weapon of his Genesire and recover its damaged parts from the battle. Demanding the Dark Mechanicum to restore it to its former glory, Khan would order their tech menials to scour the aftermath of the battle for Gorchild's teeth, for they were forged from the fangs of Myca dragons, native to the world of Luther McIntyre. Unable to retrieve all the axe's teeth from the battlefield, Khan would hammer shards from the skulls of fallen Myca dragons housed within the Conqueror's Museum of Conquest, and recover their teeth to improvise components for his newly restored weapon. Wielding the chain axe forevermore, the bite of Gorechild would sunder millions in the eras to come. For years, the World Eaters would harry the loyalists of the throne as the most barbaric and savage marauders the Imperium had ever faced. At the forefront of the final battle for the soul of the Imperium, the defenders of the Siege of Terra would observe firsthand the depravity to which the World Eaters had sunk. Fearless in their headlong charges against walls of lasfire, artillery bombardments, and bolter fire, the blood-drunk warriors of the 12th Legion would show no fear in their suicidal charges against the walls of the Imperial Palace. With Kharn at the forefront of every one of their skirmishes, the champion of Khorne would claim skulls in excess to any of his peers and prove to be a threat too potent to ignore. Confronted by the Imperial Fist Captain, Sigismund, the Emperor's champion would look in horror at what his once noble compatriot had become. Once close during their joint campaigns of the Great Crusade, the Black Templar of the 7th had fought alongside Kharn within the gladiatorial pits of the Conqueror as his most trusted chain brother. Now a shadow of his former self, consumed with bloodlust and spasms of rage, Kharn would look upon the visage of his paragon opponent before the two would clash in battle. Bested by Sigismund, Kharn would lay upon the blood-soaked soil of Terra on the precipice of death. Rescued by his kin of the 12th Legion, Kharn would be extracted from the battlefield in a state of dormancy. The remaining captains fought among themselves as to whom would lead their forces, with the murder of one of the captains unleashing a torrent of blood across Kharn, reviving him from his slumber. Regarded as a miracle gifted by the blood god himself, Kharn would live despite the failure of the traitors to overthrow the Imperium. Vowing to never again taste the bitterness of defeat, Kharn would demand that any who would fail in the name of the blood god must submit themselves to save the bloodthirst of their patron. Retreating into the Eye of Terror, the World Eaters would lick their wounds as the shame of their defeat gnawed at their pride. With their Primarch banished from the material realm by the great angel, Sanguinius, the World Eaters would look to Kharn for leadership. Claiming the demon world of Scalathrax as their base of operations deep within the Ocularis Terribus, the once world of the Eldari would prove a prize worthy of competition between the traitor legions. Coveted by the Emperor's Children Legion due to its abundance of soul stones, it would not take long for a war for supremacy of the world to erupt. Engaging in bloody battles with Kharn at their vanguard, the conflict would cause the planet to be engulfed by an unnatural void-spawn squall of bitter cold. Agreeing to a ceasefire as both legions took shelter, the Astartes would be unable to endure the cold for more than moments before freezing to death. Enraged at the delay of his wrath for even a solar day, Kharn would turn on his kin within their shelters. Armed with a flamer, Kharn would burn his sheltered kin from their hovels and slay both his own men and the Emperor's children across the frozen surface. Fueled by a burning hatred of cowardice, Kharn would kill droves of World Eaters until being confronted by his own mentor, Centurion Gruna. Decrying his madness in his slaying of his own brethren, Gruna would mark him as the betrayer of his legion. Laughing at the accusation, Kharn had slain 1 million souls in the name of his new patron, and had exceeded the ordained challenge of his former mentor as vindication of his deeds. Slaying Gruna with Gorechild, Kharn had proven himself to be the victor of the contest, and would not suffer reprimand, criticism, nor derision from lesser men. Disgusted at the weakness of his legion, the Chosen of Khorne would continue his murder spree across Scalathrax and single-handedly fragment the loyalties of his legion. Scattering their ranks into small warbands of Khornate berserkers, the remnants of the 12th Legion would remain divided for the majority of their future wars across the stars. Said to have killed more of his kin than any other warrior across the stars, never has there been a more fitting attribution to an Astartes than that of the betrayer to Kharn. Hounding the galaxy for over 10 millennia, the betrayer of the World Eaters has assumed the title of the Chosen of Khorne, and in many ways exceeds even the prestige of his Primarch. His claimed skulls in battle, said to be piled high by the Blood God aside his bronze throne, the tally of Kharn the Betrayer increases 8-fold within each passing century. Bathed in the blood of his enemies, and rending his foes limb from limb with Gorechild, the favor of Khorne gifts Kharn with an aura of fell protection, as his offerings bring immense satisfaction to the Blood God. For Khorne cares not where the blood flows, only that it flows. And by this same mantra, the betrayer fells friend, foe, the innocent and the wicked alike in his never-ending frenzy of violence. Joining campaigns such as the 13th Black Crusade of Abaddon the Despoiler, solely for the opportunity to slay great swaves in the name of Khorne, in his most lucid states, Khan also revels in any campaign seeking to humble and destroy the bastions of the Imperium. Never trusted by his allies, but an indispensable tool when unleashed upon their enemies, the forces of chaos, though wary of the betrayer, call for his aid only for the most desperate and suicidal of missions. His unyielding madness and unquenchable thirst for destruction, never sated, no matter how much blood is spilled or skulls claimed for the Skull Throne. The nails spiked at him. He fought harder. He fought faster. His muscles ripped apart and were instantly reknitted. His blood vessels burst and were restored. He felt heat surge through his body, hotter and whiter than any heat he had ever endured. The black sword resisted it all, silently, implacably, infuriatingly. It was like fighting the end of the universe. Nothing could shake the faith before him. It was blind to everything but itself, as selfish as a jewel thief in a hoard. His chain axe whirred as wildly as he'd ever thrown it, igniting the promethium vapor in the air, sending the blood lashing out like whipcord. He scored hits with it. He wounded the ghost. He made him stagger, made him gasp. The heat roared within him, turbocharging his hearts. He heard the coarse whisper of the great god in his bruised ears.
Do it. Do this thing. Do this thing for me.
The ghost came back at him, tall and dark, his brow crackling with lightning flecks, his armor as light devouring as the blade he wielded. Khan became sublime in the face of that. The violence he unleashed was like a chorus of unending joy. The ground beneath the two of them was destroyed, sending them plummeting in the clouds of debris. Even when they crashed to the earth, they fought on. They rocked and swayed around one another, obliterating everything within the arc of a sword or the armlet of an axe length.
I am not,
he blurted, feeling the tidal wave of exhaustion drag on even his god-infused limbs. He realized what he had done, then. In the midst of his madness, even as the great god poured himself into his brutalized body, he knew what transformation had occurred. They had always told themselves, after Nuceria, that the Imperium had made the World Eaters. It had been their fault. The injustice, the violence, it had forged that lust for conflict, for the endless rehearsal of old gladiatorial games, like some kind of religious observance to long and justifiable dead deities. That given the excuse for their atrocity, every act of wanton bloodletting, they had done this to us.
I am not.
But now Khan saw the circle complete. He saw what 7 years of total war had done to the Imperium. He saw what its warriors had been turned into. He had a vision, even then, in the midst of the most strenuous and lung-bursting fighting he had ever experienced, of thousands of warriors in this very mold, marching out from fortresses of unremitting bleakness. Every one of them as unyielding and soul-dead and fanatical as this one, never giving up, not because of any positive cause in which they believed, but because they had literally forgotten how to seed ground. And he saw then how powerful that could be, and how long it could last, and what fresh miseries it would bring to a galaxy already reeling under the hammer of anguish without limits. And then he, even Khan the Faithful, shuddered to his core.
I am not,
he fought on, now out of wild desperation, because this could not be allowed to go unopposed. This could not be countenanced. There was still pleasure, there was still heat and honor and the relish of a kill well made, but it would all be drowned by this cold flood if not staunched here, on Terra, where their kind had first been made, where the great spectacle of hubris had been kicked off. He had to stand. He had to resist for humanity, for a life lived with passion, for the glorious pulse of pain, of sensation, of something. "I am not," he panted, his vision going now, his hands losing their grip. "As damaged." The black sword came at him again. It was impossible, this way of fighting, too perfect, too uncompromising, without a thread of pity, without a kernel of remorse. He never even saw the killing strike. The sword edge hurled at him with all the weight of emptiness, the speed of eternity, so magnificent in its nihilism that even the great god within him could only watch it come. Thus was Khan cut down. He was dispatched in silence, cast to the earth with a frigid disdain, hacked and stamped down into the ashes of a civilization, his throat crushed, his skull broken, and chest caved in. He was fighting even as his limbs were cut into bloody stumps, even as the reactor in his warp-throbbing armor died out, raging and thrashing to the very end. But by then, that was not enough. The last thing he saw, on that world at least, was the great dark profile of his slayer. The Black Templar, turning his immaculate blade tipped down and making ready to end the last bout the two of them would ever fight. "Not as damaged," gasped Khan, in an agony greater than anything the nails could ever have given him, but with more awareness of the lucid cruelty of the universe than he had ever possessed before. "As you..." And then the sword fell, and the god left him, dead, amid the ruins of his ancient home.
Salute your Primarch, warhounds! Salute he who shed blood on the hot dust and made the High Riders pay for their arrogance! Salute your Bloodsire and the General of the 12! Salute the one whose soldiers were named the Eaters of Cities! Salute him, Astartes!
And the warhounds answered him, hands and voices lifted in salute, and axe heads were crashed against the floor. Gathering around Angron, he towered silently at their center. They shouted and saluted again, and Khan found the strength and voice to stagger to join the circle and add his shouts to theirs. "Primarch," said Angron. His voice was a murmur, but it cut the warhounds' voices straight to silence. "I am a general again."
Primarch!
shouted Draga in response.
General! Your warriors were the Eaters of Cities, Lord, but with you to command us, the warhounds will be the Eaters of Worlds!
For a moment, Angron swayed, his eyes and fists closed, but then he looked at Draga, from there to Khan, and he smiled. "World Eaters," he said, slowly, tasting the sounds. "World Eaters. So you shall be then, little brothers. You'll learn to cut the rope, we shall bleed, and be brothers." This time they all met his eyes. Slowly, one of Angron's fists came up to return their salutes.
Come with me then, World Eaters. Come down into my chamber, and we will speak.
Angron turned on his heel and walked back into his chamber. Draga served as a captain of the World Eaters Legion during the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy. Leading the Ninth Company as a warhound of repute for many years, with the discovery of their Primarch, Angron Falkir, Draga witnessed the slaughter of his senior officers when each sought to console him for the loss of his gladiators of his homeworld, the Eaters of Cities. 8th Captain Khan managing to reason with the Lord of Red Sands, despite Draga's fears. Upon the emergence of their tormented liege, the 9th Captain uttered that the Legion shall be as Eaters of Worlds. Coining the title to which the 12th Legion would henceforth be known, Draga, armed with his meteor hammer, embarked upon the most brutal campaigns, and for a time, reveled in his Legion's newfound purpose. Implanted with the Butcher's Nails brain implant, alike to his brethren, Draga managed by sheer force of will to retain much of his character within the throes of bloodlust, his standing as a captain one position lower than Khan, further bolstering his pedigree. Yet as the flames of heresy tore the Imperium in twain, the World Eaters would be dragged into further turmoil wrought by their crimson-spattered lord, his folly forcing Draegr and his company to fight during the Battle of Armatura and fateful Siege of Terra. Surviving the devastation of the Throne World as their Primarch endured banishment into the tides of the Immaterium, with his defeat by the Great Angel, Draegr gathered his remaining 9th Company alongside elements of the 17th, led by Captain Argus Brond. Escaping the Sol system aboard the Voidcraft, Defiant, dragging Captain Karn to safety following his defeat at the hands of the Emperor's champion, Sigismund, unable to awaken the 8th Captain by virtue of the grievous wound inflicted by the Black Blade of Rogel Dorn's greatest son. Draegr knew without Angron to rally the Legion, only Karn would be capable of filling the power vacuum left in his wake. A symbol of the 12th Legion's stubborn resolve, who had led the Legion in the Red Angel's stead on more than one occasion, Karn could not be allowed to die, their descent into barbarism inevitable without their champion's example. Blaming the Emperor's mistreatment of Angron for his Legion's misfortune, Draegr showed no interest in bowing to the Blood God in exchange for salvation, retaining his panoply's colours and eschewing the barbs of superstition. Forbidding gladiatorial rituals aboard his Voidcraft until new recruits could counter the losses incurred from such blood sports, Draegr ensured what remained of their apothecaries continued their toil, training mortal crew members to aid their efforts. Awaiting the time when Karn would awaken from his long slumber to unite the Legion in purpose, with his eventual revival, only 300 World Eaters remained aboard the Defiant as war between legions began to stir, with Draegr's execution of emissary Tiberius Angelus Antaeus. Stating coldly that nothing unifies like a war, Draegr ensured combat against the tattered remnants of the Emperor's children, fighting within a stable star system, within a pocket of real space within the warp, upon the world known as Scalafrax. Surrendering to the Butcher's Nail's influence for a time, galvanizing his slaughter of the 3rd Legion aboard their warship, the Golden Absolute, Draegr and Karn plotted its course to collide with the planet's surface, using its escape pods to descend following its impact. The betrayal of Scalafrax giving rise to a monster who would harry the stars forevermore, with the ascension of Karn the Betrayer now ensured Draegr's deeds would hereafter be unknown. His efforts to unify the World Eaters Legion continued by those who would inherit what could loosely be considered leadership. None know if Draegr still fights to this day, or alike to many of his kinsmen, has fallen in the name of ideals long eroded by millennia of suffering.
Though the gates that stand between the mortal world and the immortal realm of chaos are now closed to me, still I would rather die, having glimpsed eternity, than never to have stirred the cold furrow of mortal life. I embrace death without regret, as I embrace life without fear. Kargos served as an apothecary of the World Eaters Legion 8th Company during the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy. A member of the command squad of the 8th Captain of the 12th Legion, Karn, Kargos would earn the nickname Bloodspitter due to his proclivity to spit blood into the eyes of his opponents within the dueling arenas of the World Eaters' flagship, the Conqueror. Paired with regularity alongside the Blood Angel's captain, known as the Flesh Tearer, Nasir Amit, the Astartes would form a bond of friendship and regard one another as chain brothers. Possessed of a great wit and an uncharacteristic sense of humor for an Astartes of the 12th, Kargos would often calm his enraged brethren during times of stress. Yet during the betrayal of Istvan III, Kargos would join his legion and their Primarch in their descent into barbarism and madness. Saving the life of Karn prior to the invasion of Terra, Kargos would, alike to his kin, inevitably be consumed by bloodlust, and in breaking his apothecary instruments, succumb to the insanity of the Butcher's Nails and the thrall of the Blood God. Finding his captain's broken body following Karn's duel with the first captain of the Imperial Fists, Sigismund, during the Siege of Terra, Kargos would wield the chain axe Gorechild in his name. Following the guidance of the Word-Bearer's Dark Apostle, Inzar Terus, Kargos would infiltrate the inner palace of Terra, and during his assault on a refugee convoy, be confronted by the Flesh Tearer. Dueling the embittered and enraged Blood Angel, Kargos' throat would be cut by Nasir, yet he would survive the encounter. Treated for his wounds, Kargos would once more join the Siege of Terra during the assault of the Eternity Gate. Coming close to ending the life of the Adeptus Mechanicus Magos, Arcan Land, Kargos' rampage would once again be thwarted by Nasir Amit. Lying upon the Earth of Terror, Kargos' life would seemingly end beneath the threshold of the Sanctum Imperialis. Yet fractured sources claim that the Bloodspitter still lives and diligently serves the Taker of Skulls to this day as a champion of Khorne. Though for the sake of the Imperium, its subjects breathe a sigh of relief that such claims are dubious. And should they be true, the Emperor's angels shall once more humble the Bloodspitter of Chaos.
Skane was the one to approach Lotara. Skane the Destroyer. Skane the Ugly. Sergeant Skane, whose blood was so poisoned by his sacred weaponry that he might never know the immortality promised to the Legiones Astartes in their genetic heritage. Skane spoke the words that began everything. A single sentence that was notably less for the treachery it suggested, and more for the fact no one believed he could string that many words together anymore. What he said wasn't unprecedented. They were words everyone had already fought themselves, either in moments of fear when they were bathed in the sweat of survival, or in the increasingly rare moments of peace aboard a warship that seemed to want them dead. Skane spoke what was on so many minds, perhaps because he was so close to losing his own. He was ragged and twitching, and had to speak through scabbed lips that he couldn't stop biting. He'd lost control of his Betches gland some weeks before. Now his chin was raw, with a rash from a constant trickle of acidic drool. One of his eyes was gone, punctured in a duel a month back, somewhere in the bowels of the warship, where every chamber was an arena, drenched red in emergency lighting. Somehow, the wound hadn't healed. Red tears dripped from it, night and day. The blood just kept flowing, and so, with the freedom of the almost mad and the nearly dead, Skane was the one to come to the Conqueror's captain and speak the words that damned them all. He cornered her in one of the subsidiary spinal corridors, diverging from the main avenue along the Conqueror's back. She was on the way to her quarters when he caught her, massacred her bodyguards, and backed her against the wall. His remaining eye was bright with fever, his movements twitchy and feral. Every few moments, his face would contort with muscle tics, and he jerked his head towards a voice only he could hear. Skane served as a member of the World Eaters Legion during the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy. A destroyer sergeant of the 8th Company under command of Captain Khan, this brutal warrior, covered in blood bruises, endured countless hours of radiation poisoning, vented from the weapons he wielded. Refusing to lead his destroyer Carter, despite requiring an augmetic neck collar to help treat a cancer which infested his vocal cords. Only thanks to the toil of Apothecary Kargos was Skane supplied replacements which would once again endure similar punishment. Present aboard the World Eater's flagship, the Conqueror, during its voyage to the Siege of Terra, now harboring the presence of the Blood God, Khorne, this Gloriana Voidcraft struggled to maintain supplies and necessary auxiliary staff. Many World Eaters losing their minds as the call of Karnef sent them into fits of bloodlust. Skane likewise suffered untold torment as his irradiated body languished within the bowels of Angron's chariot. Demanding shipmistress Latara Saren leave the Conqueror alongside him to prevent losing themselves to the thrall of chaos. A clandestine group of World Eaters of common cause assembled, knowing that should their intent be known, their insane kindred would see such as an act of mutiny. Saren securing 5 shuttles to aid the conspirators' flight to the nearby Voidcraft designated Bestiarius. Captain Maruk, Lotara, and Skane would remain on board the Conqueror until their kindred had escaped its confines. Yet as the coterie approached the shuttle bay, Captain Khan barred their path, declaring all traitors to the War Master's ideals and thus enemies of the Legion. Skane charging at his captain in order to enable Maruk and Sarin's escape despite knowing such an act to be suicidal. Once easily bludgeoned by Khan, the champion of Khorne raised his Primarch's chain axe, Gorechild, to deliver the killing blow. Yet Khan stayed his hand at the behest of Lotara, as she explained Skane's death was her responsibility to enact. A single las pistol round shot through his lone remaining eye with dispassionate surety. Each vessel which escaped the Conqueror, destroyed by virtue of Lotara and Khan's planning. A simple phrase, "No one runs from the Conqueror," sealed the fate of Captain Maruk and his kin. The sacrifice made by Sergeant Skane, as apocryphal as his Legion's loyalty to the War Master's ill-fated betrayal of the Imperium.
You are a tool. You have been badly used, Endrid. This I admit. You're a tool without equal. A living weapon, akin to those that came later. Yet subtly different. A necessary evil.
I am as I was made.
The Legiones Astartes of the Primus founding would forge the legacies for every Astartes to follow in their wake. Every legion of Space Marines would revere the first to bear their standards and spill the blood of the Imperium's enemies. For today, we shall elucidate an Astartes of pure vengeance, instilled with the warrior creed of his legion, the last warhound of the 12th Legion, Endrid Har. The warhounds of the Legiones Astartes would act as the brutal enforcers of the Emperor's will. Bereft of poise or grace, these warriors would more than any prize ferocity and unremitting savagery in battle. Yet before the Legion had been named its first ill-fated title, the 12th Legion would consist of a few companies, one of which only 4 initiates remained. Within the Imperial gene-works of Holy Terror, these already battle-tested and scarred warriors would further undergo the gene seed transplantation and training of a Space Marine. Yet of these 4 initiates, only one would survive. A living weapon, the last remaining Astartes of his doomed company would bear over his already enhanced brethren. Massive in scale, this so-called mongrel Space Marine was the culmination of as of yet untested processes of gene implantation that further generations would be streamlined. A truly singular Astartes, Har would serve his burgeoning legion with distinction. Tasked to hunt down a band of renegade Thunder warriors during the Cerberus insurrection, Har would assault the so-called Daitar compound within the asteroid prison colony. So large would be Har's size, and so overwhelming would be his strength, Endrid would face the Thunder warriors in single combat. Breaking a warrior's back across his knee in one engagement and snapping the neck of another with his bare hands. Fighting alongside the Emperor, Har's lineage would be rumored to be of the Thunder warriors' own ranks, though such speculation would neither be refuted nor acknowledged by Har. Though if this were to be proven true, it would explain his massive size in comparison to his Astartes brothers. Already a legend among his peers within the newly monarched Warhounds, the so-called Riven Hound would remain a ruthless example for all to follow as he ascended to the rank of Praetor, or Captain, within the Legion. Yet with the Legion's introduction of their Primarch, the fortunes of the Warhounds would begin to darken. Of all the Legions, historians and remembrancers concur that it is likely the Primarch of the 12th Legion, Angron, would have the most violent and pernicious relationship with his sons. Embittered from the start of his induction into the Emperor's Imperium, the merciless slave of Nuceria would hate his gene-son's attempts to gain his favor. In a drastic move to bring themselves further to the plight of their Primarch, the now World Eaters would adopt the heritage of Nuceria as their own and implant themselves with the cortical implant, the Butcher's Nails. Enhancing their levels of aggression into boundless feral rage, the Eaters of Worlds would further exacerbate their reputation as butchers of the Legiones Astartes. Yet among the few Astartes that would refuse such a heretical implant, Har would draw on his savagery by his own terms. Waging war in the name of his Primarch, though accruing scars aplenty, Endrid would return from each war zone time and again. Recruited by Malcador the Sigillite to conduct specialized tasks in the name of the Emperor, Endrid would be removed from his legion to apply his skills to distant battles. Yet despite his deeds made in the name of the Emperor, Har would be imprisoned with the World Eater's betrayal of the Imperium. As the embers of Istvan III still burned, Har's loyalty would be brought into question. Imprisoned within Kambamawu, within the Himalaya Mountains, alongside the Crusader host and outcast dead, the Riven Hound would languish for a time before deciding to break free from his bonds. Slaying many loyalists during his escape from the Vault, Endrid would remain loyal to the Emperor, yet never be contained like a feral dog. Learning of the War Master's betrayal and that of his legion, Endred would resolve to kill Horus Lupercal. Removing all traces of his former legion from his armor, the Riven Hound would swear a death oath to atone for his legion's crimes. Assembling a Black Shield unit of former Death Guard, Iron Warriors and Raven Guard to fight by his side, Har would command his band, known as the Fangs of the Emperor, in their quest to avenge their legion's former glories. Capturing the Sons of Horus vessel, Cicatrix Tyrannus, the Fangs of the Emperor would rename the vessel Ruination as a symbol of their intent against the traitors. Assuming the identity of the ship's commander, Raxor Karadan, and his men, the Black Shields under the command of Har would infiltrate the secret facility of Zana Tisiphone. Seizing the Ordinatus machine weapons during the Zana incursion from traitor hands, Endred and his second-in-command, the Death Guard Forge Tyrant, Erud Varn, would strike a devastating blow against the traitor war effort. Yet such skirmishes would not be without cost. Commanding his men with sheer intimidation and violent reprisal, mutinies would be rife within the Fangs of the Emperor. With the Death Guard accompanying Har and Varn during their infiltration of Zana, refusing to follow his orders. For their lapse in loyalty, Har would kill the Death Guard, yet spare Erud Varn. Refusing to compromise on an opportunity to hurt the traitor war effort at any cost, Varn would be persuaded begrudgingly to remain at the Riven Hound's side. Endred's obsession to kill the War Master would not be reasoned against by any under his command, no matter how self-destructive or suicidal his orders would be deemed by his men. Succeeding in securing the Ordinatus Mithrax and Ashurax, the Fangs of the Emperor would also deny the Ordinatus Ulator Neperfax from remaining in the hands of the traitors. Despite their small band being hopelessly outnumbered, they would prove an effective and deadly thorn in the side of the War Master. Reuniting with a member of his former legion, the World Eater's apothecary, Calibos, Har would come to understand the depths of depravity to which his own legion had sunk. Observing the experiments made to Astartes neophytes of the 12th in the name of progress, Endred would look in horror at the creatures his once friend had created. Despite Calibos being estranged from his legion, he had nonetheless been driven mad in his pursuit of crafting a warrior to end the war. Dueling within the Laboratory of Horrors, a creature would escape its confinement and mortally wound Calibos. Endred would kill the abomination, and with a heavy heart end the life of his once close brother. Despite his best efforts to become more than a weapon of war, Endred's interaction with his former legion and wavering battle brothers would break his resolve. He had accepted any mission given by the Sigillite, or chance should it allow for the spilling of traitor blood. And his hands had been bathed in the blood of many. Traitors, loyalists, brothers, subordinates, innocents. Yet Har's bloodlust would not be sated until the War Master's own blood soaked his hands. Aiding the call of the Imperial Fist Primarch, Rogel Dawn, to stem the tide of the War Master's forces during the Battle of Beta Garmon. Relenting in his acceptance that he was a weapon of war and nothing more, the Riven Hound and his men would make their final stand during the Siege of Terra. Joining the loyalist defense of the Saturnine Gate, Har's men would aid the Knights Errant commanded by Garviel Loken and Nathaniel Garrow. Facing the Sons of Horus, Har's ultimate objective to face the War Master would seem to be close at hand. Yet as the battle waged, the champion of the 16th Legion would stand against the Riven Hound, First Captain Ezekiel Abaddon. Alongside Nathaniel Garrow, Endred Har would battle the Inheritor to his War Master's ruin. Despite his fierce fury in battle, Har would be slain by Abaddon. Yet due to his massive size, as he fell from the killing blow, he would crush Abaddon as they crashed to the ground. Allowing a brief moment for Nathaniel Garrow to slay the First Captain, Abaddon would narrowly escape the embrace of death due to his Terminator armor's teleportation beacon. Har's journey to slay the arch-traitor, while not achieved, would nonetheless be a valiant stand in the eyes of his Imperium. So few of your kind truly understand. Warriors make for adequate butchers, but poor killers. But you are a killer, Endred a killer among killers.
I am as I was made, and I make no excuses.
Delvarus served as a centurion of the World Eaters Legion during the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy. Born on the jungle world of Novus Principia, its conquest of the planet during the Great Crusade by the 12th Legion paved the way for his induction within their ranks. Ascending through the ranks of the then Warhounds as a reputable and formidable warrior, when paired with the Imperial Fist Templar, Sigismund, within their fighting pits of the Conqueror, it is said that no opposing pair lasted more than half a minute of dueling before first blood was drawn. Among the few of his kin to not shave his scalp and implanting his iron teeth within his gums, his long locks worn loose and dark complexion marked his lineage as a proud son of his homeworld. Sharing few cultural similarities among his legion, due to its diverse collection of Astartes from countless conquered worlds, the unity of the World Eaters to the warrior creed of their Primarch, Angron, solidified their mutual hunger for battle. Losing the majority of his men during the Genna massacre at the hands of the robotic simulacrums, the death of his company officer, Captain Barker, allowed for the promising sergeant to be promoted due to his survival fighting untold hordes of the Gennan synthetics, wielding his meteor hammer. Commanding the 44th Company and 5 of the elite Triari companies of the Legion, their pledge to defend the 12th Legion's flagship, Conqueror, was of paramount import. Reckless in his proclivity to join his Legion's planetary assaults of worlds at the expense of his duties to defend the Conqueror, his unsanctioned drop upon the warworld of Armatura left the flagship vulnerable during the Shadow Crusade of the Horus Heresy. The Ultramarines assaulting its defenses, with Delvarus' return to the Conqueror, he would be shot by the captain of the flagship, Lotara Sarin. Unharmed from the lasgun due to his ceramite, Delvarus would be confined to his quarters following the battle, and once released be forced to duel within the fighting pits. Enduring 26 duels, far in excess of the maximum amount of 8, his humiliation at the hands of Apothecary Kargos, the Bloodspitter, after sparing his life after fighting to the death, forever stained his honor. Following his lost duel of Sanguis Extremis, Delvarus submit his soul to a demonic entity and transformed into a possessed Astartes. Leading his warband of the Riven, comprised entirely of possessed Chaos Space Marines, known as Secondborn, Delvarus' failure would be further compounded with the traitor defeat of the Horus Heresy. Blinded by black cataract growths within his eyes and bearing a crown of thorns upon his brow, the winged pawn of chaos relied upon his remaining enhanced senses to combat his foes. Joining forces with the Black Legion following the Great Scouring and rise of the new War Master of Chaos, Abaddon the Despoiler, Delvarus returned to his former duties as a guardian of a flagship. Defending the vengeful spirit, Chariot of War Masters, his involvement during Abaddon's first Black Crusade freed him from further ignominy. Falling during 781.M31 at the Battle of Cadia, Delvarus perished protecting the vengeful spirit at the hands of a Death Guard sorcerer lord, Fargus Daravek. His legacy that of a pawn of chaos, unable to protect his men, his legion, nor his charges. Leovine Ukris served as a member of the World Eaters Legion during the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy. Originally a centurion of the 12th Legion's 50th Heavy Support Company, following the destruction of Prospero by the Wolf King, Ukris formed an unlikely camaraderie with an orphan of the Crimson King. Rescuing a Skandor Kion from the ruin of his homeworld, Lior, as he would affectionately be nicknamed by the sorcerer, earned a debt of gratitude which would forever change his destiny. Present during the Siege of Terra, Leovine's favoured use of heavy-ranged weapons stirred the ire of the Blood God, his plasma cannon exploding in his hands, severing both his arms to the elbows. Nicknamed Fire Fist thereafter, such a dark jab at his misfortune haunted his pride for the remainder of his life, his injury sustained preventing him from fighting for the remainder of the siege. Recovering from his devastating wounds following the defeat of the traitor invasion, Leovine assembled a warband of his own, known as the 15 Fangs, as his legion of old fragmented during the Battle of Scalafrax. Allying with the Widowmaker of the Sons of Horus, Falcus Kyber, the 15 Fangs began to earn a reputation as brilliant warriors following their destruction of the Wordbearer Warband, the chapter of the Onyx Maw. Reuniting with his indebted comrade, Kion the Black, as Kyber rallied all available manpower in his quest to confront the former first captain of the 16th Legion, Ezekiel Abaddon. During their venture to the Vengeful Spirit, Leovine's warband would be sundered during a skirmish against the Emperor's children. Capturing the Swordmaster, Telemachon Lyrus, during the struggle, Ukris's loyalty to the cause would in time be rewarded with their discovery of Abaddon, his actions aiding the purge of the 3rd Legion stronghold of Harmony, earning him membership as the 5th of the War Masters Ezekarion. Casting off the heraldry of the World Eaters in exchange for the colours of the War Masters Black Legion, Leovine for his service was entrusted with fragments of the Great Angel's Moonsilver sword. Fitting the shards to a chain axe and promptly losing it during a deployment, the callous nature of the Fire Fist would eventually cost him his life. Perishing during the 7th Black Crusade of Abaddon during the Battle of Makan, the valor of the Blood Angels, Rampagers, and Carcharodon's chapters finally set to rest the Devastator of the Ezekarion. His duty to the War Master finally concluded after 7 millennia of service.
Mesa Varen was the former captain of the 12th Company of the World Eaters Legion during the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy. Known throughout the Adeptus Astartes legions due to his fearsome reputation, Varen was a regular victor in the 12th Legion's gladiatorial fighting pits. Revered for his battlefield victories across many campaigns, Varen would also be characterized for his sense of honor, a virtue uncommon within the World Eaters. During the beginning stages of the Horus Heresy at Istvan Free, Angron, Primarch of the World Eaters, would send his personal guard to kill Varen. Commandeering the World Eaters frigate, Daggerline, Varen would escape the Istvan system and save Captain Ricatio, loyalist Astartes of the Emperor's children. Joining forces with the loyalist survivors of Istvan Free to venture to Holy Terra, warning the Emperor of the traitorous rebellion. Nathaniel Garrow, former Death Guard battle captain and progenitor of the Knights Errant, would subsequently recruit Varen into the fold of his order and travel alongside Tylos Rubio to Istvan Free. Finding the crazed soul Cerberus amongst the rubble and horrific plague zombies. Driven mad by the horrors he had endured, the man whom had once been Garviel Loken suffered from amnesia, yet guarded his long-deceased brother's corpse, Tarek Torgadon. In a psychotic rage, Cerberus would attack the Knights Errant, with Garrow intent on slaying the enraged Astartes to end his long suffering. Yet Varen would sway Garrow's mind, stating that too many loyal sons of the Emperor had been slain. Encircled by foul demon hosts of Nurgle, the Knights would slay their attackers and convince Garviel Loken to aid in their cause. Varen would grow close to Loken, saving his life during a battle aboard the Sons of Horus flagship, the Vengeful Spirit, losing his arm in a battle against Mournival captain, Horus Axamand. Once recovered, Varen would aid the Knights Errant in slaying demonic infestations throughout the Terran system for the remainder of the Horus Heresy, yet would end his duty alongside Loken and Garrow in the ensuing Battle of White Mountain. On the slopes of the White Mountain, Varen would be possessed by the demon known as the Lord of Flies. Confronted by Loken, Varen would remember his friendship to his brother Astartes and stoke the fires of defiance within him. Grabbing a brace of grenades from Loken, Varen would sacrifice himself and destroy the demon host, choosing to die rather than be a pawn of the ruinous powers. Lork served as a dreadnought within the World Eaters Legion during the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy. Prior to his Primarch Angron's discovery on the world of Nuceria, Lork commanded the Legion as its first chapter master during their time known as the Warhounds. Fatally injured on the planet of Jericho, Lork would be interred within a dreadnought, with some speculating him to have earned his namesake as the first dreadnought to serve within the 12th Legion. Leading the first prototype dreadnoughts of his legion, Lork would observe his battle brothers be implanted with the terrible Butcher's Nails brain implants. Taking part in the failed legion's rebellion instigated by his battle brother Centurion Mago, Lork would submit to serving his Primarch's new vision and be spared being implanted with the Butcher's Nails due to his status as a dreadnought. Lork would watch his once proud legion of the Warhounds descend into madness and barbarism. Horrified at his Primarch and Legion's actions during their slaughter of their fellow battle brothers during the betrayal of Istvan Free, Lork would nonetheless remain loyal to his Primarch, until the combined campaign of the World Eaters and Wordbearers attack on the Ultramar system, the Shadow Crusade. Observing his Primarch's transformation into a demon prince of Khorne, Lork's final shred of apathy would fade. Taking up arms against his Primarch, Lork would fail in ending his corrupted Genefather's life. Lork's final act of defiance, causing his body and dreadnought chassis to be torn to shreds by Angron, finally able to rest as the last vestige of the Warhound's pride and defiance.
Captain Erlen led the Loyalist World Eater forces during the atrocity of Istvan Free. A sullen warrior, Erlen was a distinguished leader among the World Eaters. During the atrocity with the aid of Sortavitz, he saved the lives of his men by seeking shelter from the Life Eater virus bombs let loose on the planet's surface. However, their survival would be short-lived. Facing more than double their number, led by his Primarch, Angron, Erlen and his men would fight in vain. Knowing their deaths to be imminent, Erlen would command his men to kill as many traitors as they could before he was torn apart, limb from limb, by his former brothers.
Shabran Dar served as a centurion of the World Eaters' 11th Assault Company during the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy. Nicknamed White Eyes by his legion, Dar bore stone-grey eyes with white irises, a trait native to his death world of Kuthasti. A young officer, Dar quickly ascended through the ranks of the 12th Legion after many distinguished battles and victories. Implanted with the Butcher's Nails to enhance his aggression, Dar would serve the World Eaters as a respected and fierce battle brother. Yet despite his loyal service to his Genefather and Legion, he would be marked for death during the betrayal at the Battle of Istvan Free. Surviving the initial orbital bombardment, Dar would defend himself from his attackers during the battle, harnessing his boundless rage into a means to carve his vengeance across the battle-torn surface of Istvan Free. Dar would fell many of his former battle brothers and collect their skulls, taking great delight in killing traitor officers and mounting their heads on spikes for their allies to discover. Resolving not to give in to his feral slaughter, Shabran would cage his wrath to be better used in future skirmishes. Commanding the Loyalist World Eater forces of Istvan Free, Dar would be one of the most crucial officers of the doomed resistance. Shabran's men would fight within a killing field of their own design. They would claim many scores of kills larger than their losses to the north of the Precentor's palace within the Coral City. Dar would unleash his rage, killing until the bitter end. Eventually surrounded by his treacherous brothers, Dar would perish in glorious slaughter.
Kargos and Skane fought with him, as did Esker and Jedek. The librarian threw himself into the fight, violent lightning dancing in blinding arcs between his axes. Jedek was one of the oldest living Eaters of Worlds. He'd crusaded across the stars from the Legion's founding, long before they rediscovered the Primarch's homeworld or started recruiting from worlds beyond Terra. He held the 8th Company's heraldic banner aloft, the great woven flag showing the fanged, 8-marked skull, devouring a red, dead world. Khan fell back to stand with his banner bearer.
What happened?
He shouted above the storm of sound. Jedek lifted the stump of his other arm. It ended at the elbow.
The Ultramarines happened.
Kargos crouched to reload his bolter. They're still happening, in case you haven't noticed. A bolt shell spat from the dust, crashing against Jedek's chest and driving him to one knee. The banner wavered, dipping, falling. Skane fired his pistols back, killing the hazy figure of an ultramarine, ascending the rubble slope towards them. "You're avenged, Jedek," he voxed.
I'm not dead yet,
The veteran growled. He hauled himself to his feet, raising the banner again. Blood marked the ruination of his chestplate. Khan could see the hint of an organ quivering within the mess of cracked ceramite and sundered ribcage. Brother Jedek served as a member of the World Eaters Legion during the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy. A Terran Astartes by birth, this former warhound was drawn from the original recruits of the 12th Legion. Among the oldest legionaries of the World Eaters, his tenure as a veteran warhound saw to his appointment as the standard-bearer of Captain Khan's 8th Company Command Squad. Following in Khan's footsteps as the earliest adopters of the Butcher's Nails implant, as time passed, Jedek lost all vestiges of emotion beyond the fury which battle provided. The loss of his arm from a blade of the 13th, replaced with an augmetic appendage during the days of the Great Civil War. Present during the Shadow Crusade, persecuting the subjects of Ultramar, upon the soil of his Primarch's homeworld, Jedek would be slain by the Ultramarines. His long unwavering duty to hold his legion's banner aloft finally ended. Another tenuous link to the warhounds of yore fed the red sands of Nuceria before his legion's final step towards damnation. Lord Invocatus serves as a member of the World Eaters Legion during the era Indomitus. Known as the Winged Axe, Khorne's Thunderbolt, and the Horseman of the Apocalypse, this berserker rides atop the Khornate juggernaut, Kal-Guruth, one in a bargain with the demon G'Kor. Surviving the trial, known as the Road of 8 Blood Steps, his reward of the steed would require donning the Bloodstorm Helm, which is tethered to the beast's will. The relic allowing Invocatus to also perceive any hidden foe, the heartbeats of even the calmest of enemies cannot hide from the gaze of this imposing warrior. Leading Bloodcrusher charges supported by hordes of berserkers, Lord Invocatus has won many glories for the Blood God, including his assault of the Watch Fortress within the Ebon Vale alongside the Brazen Beasts warband. Fighting beside the demon engines of his allies, Invocatus claimed myriad relic weapons from the Death Watch, their reliquaries laid bare in the wake of this champion of the Lord of Skulls. Leaving hundreds of corpses in his wake, the resurgence of a Hrud infestation would further diminish the Death Watch's presence within the Ebon Vale. The wrath of Invocatus persisting to this day, only the mightiest of warriors may prove worthy of unsaddling this warrior from his fell beast. This has been a tale of the Great Imperium of Man, read by the Remembrancer. Each living warrior of the World Eaters shames the sacrifices made by their forebears. The Eaters of City's last stand against tyranny, a stark contrast to the deeds performed by their inheritors. Anger, outrage, revenge, and spite, amongst the most powerful of emotions. Without restraint, such ambrosia imbibes the soul with nourishment at the cost of corrosive bitterness. Should you feel your temper rise at notions laced with righteousness, be wary you do not fester contempt within your soul, for often it is those drunk on wrath which perpetuate sins far graver than what gives them justification. Patience, humility, and understanding, rarely emotions which can be abused. Be sure not to stock them in short supply, lest you find yourself without plenty to become your nature.